Welcome to EB-5 Investment Voice, where attorney insights intersects with immigration investments. If you are a foreign investor, domestic fund manager, or enterprising entrepreneur and want to get the most out of the EB-5 program, you have come to the right place. I'm Mark Deal, and I'll be your co-host on this journey. I'm joined by your host, Mona Shaw, and other attorneys at Mona Shaw & Associates, as well as immigration leaders from around the world. So let's get into EB-5 Investment Voice. Hey, Mona. Before we get started on today's show, I want to address something. You brought this up earlier, and I know previous listeners have maybe brought this up in the past. You have a specific example. From time to time, we talk to regional centers and project developers, people that have investable projects. And I wanted to make it clear, we're here to inform and not endorse.
That's right, Mark. That's one of the purposes of this investment voice. We've had so many diverse people here on the show, whether it's a developer, whether it's regional center, a project developer separate from the regional center, whether it's a different kind of lawyers, whether economists, whoever. Our aim is diversity and education. We aim to bring the industry experts right onto this podcast just so that we can pick on their wealth of knowledge. But inevitably, every time we do bring out a project developer, they do know that we have an audience and they do want to try and sell their project. There's nothing we can do about that. The only thing is we can balance it by having other people and perhaps asking them thorny questions.
Right. You know, it stands to reason that people that are working in the EB-5 space that have these investable projects either have a mix of a wealth of experience, many years, in some cases, past episodes, decades of experience of investment projects. And some projects we talk to, like today, we'll get into that later, are doing something new, something that hasn't been seen before. And when you bring these people on, of course, they're excited to share their knowledge, their expertise. But of course, they also are very proud in what they do. Well, we understand that.
Right. Well, today we're talking about technology, which is not something new, and it is high money. At the end of the day, this is an investment program as well as a job creating program. And we'll get into all the ins and outs. I want to also bring on the show one of our lawyers who really has delved deep into this area, Hermione Crum.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure to be on EB-5 Investment Voice.
So anybody who's a regular listener to Investment Voice, they'll probably hear that Hermione's actually listened to almost every one of the podcasts, and she writes up her little notes afterwards. But Hermione works mostly on corporate and securities. And one of the issues that she really is looking at, we're going to bring out in this program, are the exit plans and how the exit plans differ in, for example, technology as opposed to, real estate and the same old that we have been seeing.
Mm-hmm. People who usually deal with technology and basically startups know that one particular area or one particular mechanism that people really prefer, investors really prefer, is convertible notes. We are seeing this area
Well, Hermione, just for our listener to understand a little bit here.
Yeah.
And this is before we get our guest on board. And I know we're going to talk about a convertible note later with him. What is a convertible note?
A convertible note is a type of debt which converts into equity when triggered by a future round of financing. So it really brings in the benefits both of a loan structure and also an equity, because once triggered by a future round of financing, then, the return on investment can really be doubled or tripled.
Right. So this is something that is often used in technology. We don't see this in typical real estate projects. And as I say, we're here to educate. We're not here to go for one project. But it is true also that technology is exciting and as lucrative as it can be. Not all tech projects are the same. We still have to do our due diligence in every way on each and every project. And due diligence includes check up the management, check up the finances. What is the project? What is their background, et cetera, et cetera. But in a project like this, Hermione, is a convertible note the ideal way forward?
It really depends. As Mona just mentioned, it really depends on the management team, for example, on the key personnel, whether they really have experience in the relevant field, whether they've done like business in the same area before, and also depends on how they structure it. We've seen projects structured in a way that doesn't really give investors much of a say.
I think that's most projects.
And then, of course, investors should be very wary of that. But then convertible notes can be very beneficial as well because, as I said before, like it really brings out the benefits of both a loan structure and then an equity structure. And of course, when we are talking about convertible notes here, we are talking about the NCE to JCE, not
the new commercial enterprise to the job creating enterprise.
Exactly. Not yes, not between the investors and the new commercial enterprise.
Right.
Because that will never be allowed and not allowed right now. So
So what we'll do, Mark, we have our guest coming on today. We are going to give you a few episodes to our listeners on what to look for in projects, because we know everyone is out there. November 21 is creeping up and people are looking at projects. What to look for is as far as exit plans. I think most people do understand about the job creation, but certainly we'll go into that, as well as what to look for in private placement memorandums. We have some exciting guests to talk about that.
Right. So we have a lot to discuss between now and November 21st, 2019, before these new EB-5 changes go into effect. And as you mentioned, Mona, we have a lot of episodes coming up with various guests talking about exit plans and job creation and private placement memorandums. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about a particular technology product and even technology, the bigger picture, and how it evolves and how it penetrates and how it permeates pretty much everything in the world today.
Yeah, so Mark, as mentioned, as technology really permeates every facet of business, the blurry lines of where to invest and what to invest into have started to fade for some investors. We are getting a more diverse project mix, and technology is there. You can't get away from technology. Interestingly, though, we still have our real estate topic, because today we'd like to introduce on our show a person who is able to talk about real estate and technology, Umesh Harigopal.
Umesh, welcome to EB-5 Investment Voice.
Thank you, Mark. Hi, Mona.
For those that don't know, Umesh Harigopal is an entrepreneur and executive with deep experience in transforming real estate and mortgage, financial services, healthcare, and manufacturing by applying emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence, blockchain, cybersecurity, augmented reality, and a few others I'm sure we'll dive into. Now, normally I don't dive into the various law degrees that our guests have because, well, it's implied that attorneys in the space have a degree in law. But I want to point out that Umesh has a master's and PhD in computer science from the University of Alabama with research focuses in natural language processing, neural networks, and high performance computing. And I think that makes him an ideal guest to talk about technology and EB-5's place in funding new tech startups.
Umesh, real estate tech, it's an exploding area for entrepreneurs and venture capitalists. VC people don't give their money away so easily, but in 2017, venture investors deployed more than 12 billion globally in property technology startups. It seems like this is a sector which was once ignored by the venture capitalists, and now it's here. You're involved in real estate technology. Before we even go into the EB-5 aspect, let me ask you what it is. What is PropTech? When we do know that there are startups in the United States which use PropTech, which have been very successful, like Airbnb and WeWorks.
Yeah, absolutely, Mona. PropTech is kind of a technology that started back in the early 2000s. There have been multiple versions of it. There is the initial versions, which were mainly simple places where you can go online and find a home for sale, stuff like that, which was primarily driven by generating leads for a real estate agent or a broker. And it soon transformed into a PropTech 2.0 that happened all the way till a couple of years back, which is mainly around analytics, finding valuations of homes, etc., which will kind of your estimate, right? You get a value for your home and you feel good watching it go up. But the other side of the valuation is really helping banks understand how much collateral they have. on their books and things like that. But
Right.
from there, we are now into PropTech 3.0, which is all driven by AI and machine learning. And that's where we are playing. It's a blockchain. It's primarily helping and transform the real estate technology market and the real estate industry as a whole.
This is important. We try to educate our listeners. We try to explain the different types of projects that are out there. We've had all kinds of projects which have been on this show, and how they relate to EB-5 is often pretty obvious. How can we really relate technology to EB-5? That's, I think, one of the big questions that people do ask. They do understand that, hey, technology is good. I know it's the way of the future, but how can we relate to EB-5? So I think I should start by asking, why did you choose EB-5 to raise capital?
Yeah, see, there is always the option for any startup the most common one is to go to angel funding or venture capital funding, etc., or even get any other forms of loans from other sources. The attractive part of EB-5 for us is mainly the fact that it is going to be a debt instrument, and it certainly is helpful for us in kind of managing our investments in terms of not losing our equity in the company. At the same time, we're able to improve the valuation of the company at the beginning and then be able to offer our investors the option to come back and buy into equity at a very high valuation, but at a highly discounted price for the initial EB-5 investors in the company, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the kind of balance we are trying to offer to our EB-5 investors.
So anybody who does EB-5 has to wants one of two things. They want their green card. That's why it's a very specific kind of investment, but they do want a return on their investment. Hermione is also with us on the show, and she has a question for you relating to jobs and job counts.
Right, Umesh. When we are talking about jobs in relation to technology-based ventures, the reason why we always prefer a regional center model is because of the induced and indirect jobs. Do you consider there will be a lot of operational jobs with a technology-based venture?
Before you answer that, Umesh, I think what we were trying to get at is that some areas, some industries like infrastructure naturally produce lots of jobs. And then some industries, a lot of the industries that we use in EB-5, the real estate, sometimes we are really pulling to get the jobs because we want the investors, because we don't have enough construction jobs. So it's always good to go into the areas where we can get a surplus. So I think that's really where she's coming from.
Yep, absolutely. Makes sense. So yeah, in technology companies, there are jobs in various categories. You consider some of them operations, as in taking support calls from clients or doing lots of sales activities and marketing activities and so on. And there's also product development. That's kind of the similar thing around architecture and construction in a real estate setting, right? So many of the software companies have actually picked up some of the terminology from real estate, in fact, right? I mean, we have software architects and software developers, right? So there are a lot of people actually building virtual products, very much like the physical assets that come out of real estate. And the other side of building that is the operation side, like you mentioned, Hermione. We have the marketing and the sales activity and the operations and support as well, right? So, and you also mentioned about regional center versus, I think you're comparing that to a direct EB-5 in terms of how many jobs you're able to impact and everything. Mona has mentioned a couple of times before about the buying power of a $500K figure, right? And if you look at that as opposed, letting 10 jobs to be created from $500K, the real cost of that is about $600K or more than that, right? Because you end up paying like $35 an hour per person for 10 employees or a period of 1 year, you end up spending so much more money. Compare that to technology, the average hourly rate for a technologist is much higher than that. It is like $50 or $60 an hour, right? It is so much more effective to go through a regional center model for a technology investment, even more so than real estate, right?
Right. Well, thank you. The second part of any investor's search is that, okay, I want my investment to be secure, so at least I get something back. as I started off by talking about how this area really is exploding. And you mentioned 2.0. I would suggest more that we are entering into perhaps the third phase in the evolution of real estate technology. The last phase, perhaps there was a head-to-head with the commercial landlords and brokerages. But now I think that where we are, the way your technology works, I know, is that you are more complementary than competitive to the incumbents.
Oh, very much so. Absolutely. So we are part of what, in general, the World Economic Forum calls the Industrial Revolution number 4. That is happening now, and we are riding that wave, just like many of the large companies like the Googles and Amazons are trying to get on that bandwagon to be in front of the transformation in the industry. This transformation across the board, not only in real estate, not only in PropTech, across the board in the world, is to be able to augment what humans are already doing well, to be able to empower human beings or automate some aspects so that they can focus on higher value work as opposed to the regular mundane, dreary jobs that they have to do in a day, right? The dreary tasks that they have to do in a day. So that's how we are trying to add value. And we are in the PropTech 3.0 with capabilities such as artificial intelligence and deep learning that ultimately automate the work. For example, what an appraiser does. So he comes to your home, appraises your home, and comes up with a value and passes that information on to a lender to be able to underwrite the mortgage. We are trying to automate that as much as we can so that the amount of work that the appraiser does is focused on higher value and identifying the real condition of a property, or being able to use the market intelligence that he has, the local market intelligence that he has, to be able to augment that value that we come up with the property.
Right. Well, we did a little research, and I think it was Forbes which came up with the fact that United States real estate is a 35 trillion asset class. It was like, no billions anymore. We hit the trillion, and it represents a multifaceted market generating almost $1 trillion in revenue annually. And I think the Forbes quoted the IBIS World Industry Reports. But okay, the figures are out there. Yeah, we've heard that venture capitalists in 2017 deployed over 5 billion, which is like more than 150 times the 33 million they did the year before or something. But what about our investor who comes into you? How do you actually propose on returning your money to them? What is the exit that you foresee in a market like this?
I'm glad you brought that up, Mona, because he did mention earlier taking debt, and the investor would have the option to convert it to equity. So yeah, if you could continue on that thought and let us know.
Absolutely.
Yes.
We obviously were starting out with this EB-5 funding, which is primarily a debt instrument to start with. But the opportunity is so awesome. We are talking about Industrial Revolution number 4 and PropTech 3.0, which is getting billions of dollars in funding and billions in returns, etc. Obviously, we want to share with our investors a lot of those opportunities that we are going to create with the funding that we initially receive. So our plan would be to give the option to our investors at the end of their required time frame with the USCIS to keep the funding inside the job creating entity here. We would want to give the option at the end of this process for investors to come back and buy into PropMix at a pretty good discount compared to our market valuation, right? So we would be starting off right now at valuation X, and end of 5 years, we'll be at N times X, maybe 10 times X or 20 times X by then. But we do want to give the option to the investors to convert that.
So you're talking about a convertible note. Would that be written into your project, or are you thinking of something else?
No, we would want to kind of have that in the project, write that out as a conversion. Obviously, the amount of the conversion will be determined at the time of the conversion based on the valuation of the company. But the discount that we'll give based on our market valuation will be part of the project document.
Umesh, you mentioned earlier that PropTech 3.0 has had billions in funding. Now, that's not the investable project here, right? PropTech 3.0 is basically the nomenclature given to this industry, right?
That's absolutely right, Mark. I mean, PropMix, the company and the project for which we are raising EB-5 capital, is part of the PropTech 3.0 industry segment as a whole, right? And PropTech, the segment has raised billions of dollars. And we as a company are raising $10 million for our business.
Yeah, prop tech is the industry. And interestingly, it's not one that banks really readily give, or conventional banks. You don't get conventional financing. You really get more venture capitalists, vulture capitalists, as some like to call them, or angel financing. Umesh, one of the reasons that you've gone for EB-5 is because of the non-dilutive aspect of EB-5, correct?
That is correct. Absolutely. And having said that, we do want to kind of share the equity at a later point with our investors when we have already proven ourselves in the market by then, right? And we have a set valuation also.
Right. Well, is that the reward that somebody would get into coming into what's considered more perhaps high risk? Or would you say you are not as high risk?
We are reducing the risk upfront for an EB-5 investor by giving them a debt instrument. They get to wait out and see how we are doing as a company. And at the end of 5 years, they get to come back and buy into the company at a discounted price when the risk is much lower than what a venture capitalist would be taking today. The venture capital walking in today into our company would take equity and is also assuming a lot more risk. Investor is taking lesser risk with a debt instrument and coming back for an equity investment when they can take a lesser risk.
And PropMix, the company, plans to develop what?
We are developing already a platform. We are already in business for the last 3.5 years. We are a cash flow positive company generating revenue from many Fortune 500 companies with multi-year contracts. Our contracts go from 2 to 3 years at a minimum with many of the Fortune 500 companies. And we are already in the process of developing this platform, and we will continue to augment this platform with a lot more capabilities. The key capabilities are image recognition from our core set of real estate images that we have gathered. We also have data on all the properties in the US, residential and commercial, from which we generate a lot of insights. And those insights are things that we supply to mortgage companies as well as real estate agents and brokers and investors.
I was about to say, Mark, we haven't had a project like this on the show before, have we, in all our 80-something shows?
No, Mona, we certainly haven't. And, honestly, I'm playing buzzword bingo here. PropMix is using artificial intelligence, machine learning, blockchain, chatbots, augmented reality, virtual reality, image recognition, throw it all in here. But, what's interesting is the prop tech industry is new to me. And as Umesh mentioned, is billions have been invested in this industry. And Mona, as you have pointed out, banks don't like to lend to this somewhat new growing industry because of the typical debt to what is a traditional asset, not ones and zeros, but brick and mortar that they're used to. So it's interesting to see that a company like PropMix that is using all this new technology to help the real estate industry, they're also using EB-5 to help the investable portion of it.
Mark, that's how a lot of startups work, how they get financing, because they have a limited operating history. And that's why they need additional capital, not from bank loans, because they tend to actually go for companies with a long history, so you can actually see the growth. So when it comes to something like this, EB-5 is definitely a great way for them to get financing.
And I'm pretty sure also that Congress did have startups in mind when they termed EB-5 there for the entrepreneur. We're going back to what Congress really had designed when they first put EB-5 into place in 1980.
Exactly.
Although at that point, I'm sure they did not understand PropMix or prop tech.
Well, it sounds like EB-5, even with all the changes that's happening right now, it's getting back to its roots.
That is right. And also the impact of technology and the innovation that is nurtured by this kind of capital is much longer lasting than a real estate or a real estate development in a particular location, right? It is longer lasting and much more wider. It is not impactful only within a targeted employment area. The impact is much wider because we are completely online, software as a service, and we are helping companies and businesses across the country when we are doing business from one location, right?
Right. Through all the simplification, that way they can focus on the higher value work, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
Umesh, thank you so much for coming on EB-5 Investment Voice.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you for coming on.
Thank you, Mona. Thank you, Hermione.
Thank you.
And before we let you go, loyal EB-5 Investment Voice listener, if there are topics that you want to hear about on this podcast, we would love to hear from you. Head on over to our website at mshawlaw.com. And in the top right, you'll see a Contact Us button. Just press that. And there's a little form there. Go ahead and type your name, email, and most importantly, your message. What topics would you like us to cover on this podcast? And just to make it easier for you, I've also embedded a link to the contact form directly in the podcast here. So just click on over to episode details. You'll see that link. Press on that. It will open up the page so you can let us know what you would like to hear on a future episode of EB-5 Investment Voice. Thank you for being with us today on EB-5 Investment Voice. The topics presented in this podcast is informational in nature and is not to be taken as specific legal advice. If you have questions on the topics presented in this episode or other investment immigration needs, please contact Mona Shaw and Associates. Mona and her attorney staff can be reached at mshawlaw.com. That's mshawlaw.com. Make sure you don't miss our next episode focusing on a different aspect of the EB-5 program by subscribing to the podcast. While you're at it, leave us a rating on iTunes. If you really found this episode valuable, share it with someone else that could benefit from this information. Until then, I'll see you on the next episode of EB-5 Investment Voice.